It's true, today we are going to talk about coffee, a conversation about coffee, about certain things that relate to coffee the way it is today. We'll start out by a little bit of a history of coffee and how it got here. But at first, I'd like to start with an homage to the Queen Mother, who recently died. And we'll be speaking a lot about monarchies and how coffee got around the world. But one of the things that she was quite famous for, first of all, was that she could speak French quite well. And she required that her menus be written in French and be approved. And she would refuse to eat anything out of season. So if you were to offer strawberries in the summer, that was fine. But in the winter, it was definitely a no. Why? Because they came from the other side of the planet. And that would mean that they would have a huge CO2 footprint that they would pollute. She was also against genetically modified organisms, basically because she felt that we really didn't know what was going to happen afterwards. So she was kind of a precursor to the talk I'm going to give today. The Queen Mother, quite the lady. We now have Charles III. And I think we can expect a lot of good things from him as well, given that he's always been a firm environmentalist, and he's had 73 years as an intern to get ready for the job. So there you go, cascading events, cascading benefits of coffee, circular economies. Well, coffee all began in about the 6th century, the 9th century. Take into account that a lot of things I'm going to say today could be fact, could be myth, could be legend, could be propaganda, okay? But basically, there was a shepherd, a goat herder in fact, somewhere in the land of Sheba, the Queen of Sheba, Abyssinia, present-day Yemen. Mocha, for instance, was a city in Yemen that was used as an international platform. We use that term today to talk about a drink with a mixture of chocolate and coffee. Anyway, Kaldi, the legend of Kaldi, he was watching his goats, and goats do frolic in trees. I raise goats, and they do frolic in trees. And they have been known to eat coffee. And as such, he observed that it had a great effect on them. They were quite excited about this, and he decided that he would find out what it was all about. So he took some of these coffee beans, tasted them, and spit them out. Didn't really understand what all the fuss was about, and then he threw them into his fire. And that's where it all began. Roasted coffee, the smell of roasted coffee in the morning, and then subsequently the effects, 6th to 9th century. From there, coffee spread, and I'm going to talk about the coffee plant. From the, I'd say, present-day Somalia, southern Ethiopia, it first spread east by the Dutch and some Germans. Remember, we were in the grand age of sales and empires and monarchies. Okay? East India companies, West India companies, the crowns of Portugal, France, England, Holland. Okay. They went east, okay, Indonesia. It also came around the Cape of Good Hope, and up into Europe later on. The first plants ended up in Europe in the 17th century. Now, Louis XV was not a big fan of coffee, but Louis XVI was. Okay. And the first plant, in fact, that ended up in Europe was in the Botanical Gardens in Amsterdam, owned by the Burgmeister of Amsterdam. He gave a plant to the King of France, and that subsequent plant ended up in Martinique. By this man, Gabriel Deleuze, okay, he brought it to. He used his last ration of water to save this plant. It was planted in Martinique, okay? Martinique became the world capital of coffee production. That moved on to Jamaica, it moved on to Haiti, and at the same time, it moved in the 1720s to Brazil, okay? A famous French marquise had a Brazilian military lover, and she offered him some of these plants. You have to realize that at the time it was quite illegal to transport plants around the world, okay? It was forbidden by those people that had them. Same thing was with rubber, okay? It was moved and traveled around. It was a plant that was not to be commerce, so it was smuggled out. And why I mention Brazil is Brazil today is the leading producer of coffee on earth. Okay, and all throughout this period, okay, we see how coffee was linked to monarchies, okay, and the trading companies. We also see that the triangular trade, okay, between Europe, Africa, and across the Atlantic which related to commodities such as sugar, coffee, also related to people. Okay. By 1820, there were over 100,000 people transported from Africa to the Caribbean.
How many?
100,000 per year. When we talk about slavery, we're talking about close to 9 million people. 27,000 trips from Europe to the New World. Liverpool, Bristol, London, okay. Nantes, Le Havre, Bordeaux, okay. Phenomenal amounts, a lot of money. At one time, Haiti was the world capital, one of the richest places on earth. Of course, we all know what it is today. Okay. So let's move on a little bit. So, in fact, the coffee plant traveled around the world, okay. But so did coffee as a beverage. Okay. So coffee as a beverage was certainly in Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, okay. Moved into Turkey. Ultimately ended up in Europe. We have cafes in France, the Prokop, which is the oldest cafe in Paris, certainly in London. And by the time we run around 1670 or so, in London you could see posters like this, because coffee was associated with coffee shops, much like pubs were associated with Republicans, and these were places where revolution was fomented. Okay. So there was a big campaign in Britain at the time to limit the amount of coffee, and here we see a women's petition, women's petition, okay, sponsored by the well-willers, or quite euphemistically, the protectors of Venus, okay, so that the men would not go to the coffee houses and they would return home to take care of their wives. So, always linked, okay. There are really two types of coffee, okay, basic. There are a lot of varieties of coffee, but there are two types. Arabica and Robusta. There's not a huge difference between the two, okay. Essentially, Arabica we would get from, let's say, from Brazil, okay, today, from Mexico, from Colombia, and Robusta we would get from Africa. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule. What's really important to know is that coffee is traded in futures, okay. Arabica on the New York Stock Exchange, and Robusta in London, okay? Which basically means that coffee production and crops are bought 1, 2, 3 years in advance, okay? So there's a lot of speculation. This is huge business, huge business. Another particularity was that there was an international commission that regulated the prices of coffee up until 1989. Now, 1989 was a big year in the world, right? We all know that the Berlin Wall came down, but also the International Trade Commission for Coffee, okay, was disemboweled, in fact. And I use the word disemboweled because certain important members decided no longer to participate, okay? So today, coffee is a free market product, okay, a commodity. It represents national products, independent products, almost the equivalent of petroleum products on Earth, okay? Some people feel it's the second most traded product on Earth. Some economists believe that we should use it to equilibrate North-South relations. Okay? Now, the market of coffee at that level actually is an urban legend. It's coffee isn't worth that much. There is wheat and sugar and a lot of other things. But just to suggest that coffee in the balance of trade is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, okay, very important. And the mechanisms for the price are certainly quite complex. This is the coffee world in terms of exports. Okay. Brazil is the biggest producer of coffee on earth. 45, 50, 60% in a given year. Over the last 3 years, Brazil has been in deep trouble as far as drought, and Brazil is the only coffee growing country on earth that is subject to frost. Coffee is a circum-equatorial crop that is grown within 20 degrees of the equator. Africa, the Americas, Asia. Okay. Brazil is the biggest producer. Vietnam is the second. They produce both Robusta and Arabica, just like Brazil. You can see some of the money values here. Okay. Look at Germany and Switzerland, 2.6, 2.2 billion. Okay. Why? They make as much money as the Brazilians do. Why? Because coffee is transported green. Okay, why? Because green can be stored for 1 or 2 or 3 years. In fact, Brazil has often attempted to store their production to regulate prices. Okay. And so, about 70% of the world's coffee comes to Hamburg in Germany. as green coffee, and then it's torrefied in Europe by who? The Germans and the Swiss. Germany is a great place because, in fact, it's one of the biggest importers and exporters of a lot of things. Oranges, for instance. Germany. Have you ever seen an orange tree in Germany? No, a lot of import and export. There's a second reason that the European countries can make so much money from this. I mean, there's a problem north-south as well. There's a lot of the international trade agreements do not allow these countries to torrefy. Certainly the case in Africa. Okay. So it's a fairly complex environment for that. But Brazil is the gold standard. If the Brazil crops are down, then the prices go up. And this is why I mentioned the speculation that happens in the city and on Wall Street for coffee. Okay. Coffee is a cascade of events. It starts with a tree, which offers shade and erosion control, an environment for biodiversity and a wildlife habitat. Okay. It's not part of a natural ecosystem. Okay. It can be upland, it can be low growth, it can be many, many things. Of course, sometimes when we think of coffee, we think of deforestation as well, okay, in terms of the Amazon. But in actual fact, it's a natural crop throughout the world. Just a case in point, right now in Brazil, people are tearing up their coffee to grow wheat because the prices are so depressed. As I mentioned earlier, there's no really fixed price. We've heard a lot about fair trade. Okay, Max Havelaar was a Dutch person who spent a lot of time in Indonesia, who fought for the rights of the workers. Coffee allows about 26 million families on Earth to live. Okay. And in this context, fair trade was a way of trying to compensate them for a certain amount of things. So Max Havelaar is an important individual. There's a statue to his homage in Amsterdam today if you'd like to visit. Okay. But coffee is part of a natural ecosystem. Then we move on to a sustainable economy. As I mentioned, the amount of people, the money involved, the financing of medical facilities, of infrastructures throughout the world. Okay, so coffee is a big contributor to social development and sustainable in the sense of an economy where you don't pollute too much, you don't exhaust your resources, you provide money. And coffee is interesting in this fact because it's one of the few things on earth that we can really talk about as circular economy, and I'll define that for you in a second. Okay, circular economies. Okay, we do have green economies, right? Environmentalists, and we want, let's not do harm to the planet. Okay, a circular economy is let's do good. Okay. So if I have a product, okay, and I can keep it in the circuit, an economic circuit, for as long as possible. Okay, where I'm not producing pollution, where I'm generating added value, then I can talk about a circular economy. Quite obviously, any business person will tell you if your product is not making money, it will disappear. It will not be sustainable. Now, I didn't invent this world. I just try to live in it like you do. But this is just a basic principle. Okay, a basic principle. And circular economies are interesting in that way. Okay. There are a lot of stakes involved. Okay. There is climate, okay. There is money. These are people's lives. 26 million families on Earth. Okay. Climate, the climate challenge, or maybe something even a little bit simpler. Okay. Does it make sense to throw something out which has such a high value? Does it make any sense at all from a business point of view? Okay. The stakes are quite high. In France today, if you consume more than 300 kilos of coffee per year, okay? And when you consume 300 kilos, you throw away 300 kilos, okay? Wow. It's virtually 99. When you drink your coffee, there's only about 0.1% that you drink, and the rest goes to the bin. In France today, anyone who consumes over 300 kilos cannot put it into landfill. We're concerned about greenhouse gases like methane and CO2. Okay? It has to be burnt or brought to a digester to make methane out of it. Okay? That's the only alternative. Up until Cabico, we can value these products without throwing them away. Okay? And this is very important. That legislation is French, and in 2025, you all, myself included, all of us that live around here, will have a 4th garbage bin at home for everything that is biodegradable for this reason. So, we're in that situation right now where no one really has a viable alternative to getting rid of the coffee grounds. No one. So that's where we step in, products, okay? We can collect the coffee grounds, okay? There are really two types of coffee grounds on Earth. One is yours and mine, and the other is industrial coffee grounds for those people that produce freeze-dried coffee, water-soluble coffee, instant coffee, okay? About 50-50. Half the coffee grounds go there and half the coffee grounds over there, okay? Interesting enough, we work a lot with the producers of freeze-dried coffee for many, many reasons. Standardization, traceability, using organic coffee. We'd all love to use organic coffee solely, except it only represents about 4% of what is being produced. So if you really want to have an impact on the environment, then you have to treat the rest of it. And this is quite problematic. I can use industrial coffee because it's traceable, it's imported per se, I know where it comes from, I know it's exempt from pesticides, I know it's exempt from heavy metals, okay? France is like the world's biggest consumer of Nespresso capsules, okay? 26% we're the biggest consumers, okay? All our capsules, whenever they're recollected, end up in Rotterdam in a big machine that grinds them up, spits out the aluminum on one side and the coffee grounds on another. Just a small problem is that there's always a little bit of particles that stay in the coffee grounds, and they're not really that utilizable. Industrial processes require the use of microwave ovens to dry. And have you ever put anything metal in your microwave oven? Didn't last too long. I hope you were hidden away far from it. I've done it, but that's out of silly curiosity. It blows up, is what happens. So we're talking about sorting, and collecting, sorting, and converting and transforming in production. Cabeco has developed a process where we take the coffee grounds and we remove the lipids from it, the fat from it. Okay, these fats are really rich, okay, in omega-3 acids, in let's see, vitamin E, caffeine, a lot of chromogenic substances which have a lot of qualities. And we're also finding that they're rich in a number of other molecules which are virtually unknown to science. Unknown to science. The whole idea is that we have a process, zero waste. In fact, we actually extract CO2 from the atmosphere to produce our products. Okay. What are the products? This is an example. I have a wow bag here for you later on, which will show you about everything we can do with coffee. But these are our products. Basically, we have the butter on one side, cofoil, which is the fatty part, and then the dried part, which is defatted. As soon as the dried part is defatted, it can be used in tons of things. Materials, flour, clothing. I'm going to show you some shirts that we make out of it. Okay. And of course, so these are raw materials. Okay, let's get this straight right from the beginning. These are raw materials to be further processed. Okay, they can be used as is, or they can be used by a cosmetician to make miracle creams, or in medicines, or in food supplements as to, come on David, how do you say this in English? To cut down your appetite, you know, so you don't get fat, okay? Something like that. Anyway, these are some of the active ingredients that you can see. Okay? And there's certainly many more to discover. The interesting thing here is we're talking about upcycling and not recycling. Recycling, take a plastic bottle and make another plastic bottle out of it. Okay? Upcycling, you take coffee grounds, which are worth about 50 euros a ton, okay? And you make butter out of it, which is worth 250,000 euros a ton. Okay. This is upcycling. The principle, as I mentioned before, I've been in this business for quite a while, and unless you have a product you can sell, it will make money. I mean, you want to run a pollution control system in a factory, you take that pollution and you can convert it into a lot of things, okay? But if you convert it into a product that the company cannot sell, then the structure isn't set up like that. And this is one of the important things about a circular economy. Okay, to finish, I think that's about enough for today. This is a subject we could go on for hours. Let's just talk about what's in a word. Okay. A word like food, okay? Now, why do we feed our dogs dog food, our cats cat food, and we feed our cattle feed? Why do we do that? Okay, what's in a word? Recycling, upcycling. Okay, what's in a word? Waste. Okay, Do you want to put waste on your skin? Do you want to do that? Anyway? Okay. So we'll talk about byproducts. Okay, byproducts. And this is not a vain word in the sense that they're not really waste, and that's what circular economy is all about. Okay, no waste. So what's in a word? Thanks.